Now we're going to talk about Daoism. I haven't mentioned how many people are followers of these different Chinese religious traditions because there are so many people that uh, blend Taoism, Confucianism, and Chinese Buddhism together. Very often, scholars of religion will just lump them all together and group them together as Chinese traditional religion. And so, followers of Confucianism, Taoism, and Chinese Buddhism total between 400 and 800 million people in the world today. All right, as I said last time, the word Dao is a Chinese word that means way, and also be translated as path. And as a verb, it means to say or speak or even to lead. It can refer to an impersonal creative force of the universe that establishes the yin and the yang, and from which emerge what are called the myriad things, which just means everything. So that's Tao. In Confucianism, the Tao revolves around proper patterns of human behavior, but in Chinese Buddhism, the word Tao was used as a translation of words such as Bodhi, or awakening, like the Bodhisattva, Marga, or path, and Nirvana. And so in Taoism, the word Tao means something a little bit different, just as karma has different meanings in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. So Tao has somewhat different meanings in these different religious traditions. The most thorough investigation and explanation of the Tao is found in Taoism, hence the name Taoism. If the focus of Confucianism is on the social realm, the focus of Taoism is the natural world, right? So rather than the human communities, focus of Taoism is nature, right? Including its transcendent aspects or its supernatural aspects. Taoism is often viewed more as a complement to Confucianism than a rival because the focus is in such different areas of life. Taoism is a little bit hard to define precisely because, number one, because it incorporates a wide diversity of views. There are lots of different schools of Taoist thought. And also because Taoism explicitly invites ambiguity. You could almost call it the first postmodern religion, except for the fact that it dates to at least the 5th century BCE, so that's hardly postmodern in our modern sense of the term. Taoism developed in interaction with Confucianism, Buddhism, and traditional Chinese religion. And some people see Taoism as an elevated expression of popular Chinese religion. The earliest expressions of Taoism, let's say from the 5th century BCE to the 2nd century CE, were primarily philosophical. But beginning in the 2nd century CE, Taoism became more organized as a religion. It never developed the hierarchy that you find, for example, in Roman Catholicism, or it never developed the doctrine that you find, for example, in Shia Islam. But Taoism ought to be seen rather as having a point of origin and having fixed boundaries. Like many other religious traditions, Taoism has, I should say, rather than having a point of origin or fixed boundaries like other religious traditions, Taoism can be viewed as having a common center of texts, rituals, traditions, and communities. And so it starts from a center and kind of moves out. The founder of Taoism traditionally is a man by the name of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, and remember that Zi means master, so Master Lao. He is regarded as the founder of Taoism. Traditionally, he's identified with a man in the 6th century BCE who was an archivist who was named Lao Dan. He was an archivist within the Zhou dynasty and thus contemporary with both Confucius and the Buddha. And he was supposedly the author of a work named after him called Lao Tzu, but it's known in the West as the Tao Te Ching or Tao Te Ching, right? which means the Jing part means book. So it's the book of Dao and De, the book of the way and virtue, as we defined Dao and De last time. So the book was put together in its present form by the 3rd century CE, but earlier manuscripts date all the way back to the 4th or the 3rd century BCE. It's possible that the Tao Te Ching is primarily a list of anonymous aphorisms or sayings that were passed down orally and eventually written down, perhaps by Lao Tzu. It's the basis of all Taoist thought. It's the foundation of all later Taoist writings. It's a philosophical and religious classic. It can be seen as a political work, as a book dealing with military strategy, as a transcendent spiritual masterpiece. The Tao Te Ching is viewed by some people, as all of these. The Tao in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao is presented as the one unchanging constant of the universe. Everything else changes in the universe, but the Tao, the way, the path, that is unchanging. It is the indivisible and underlying reality of the universe. The Tao is void, ineffable, mysterious. It represents a reality that is in fact nameless. Yet it is everywhere manifest and permeates everything. Think about the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna claims to be present everywhere. Remember, Krishna was the avatar of Vishnu in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna claims to be present everywhere and in everything. And so that's, in a way, kind of similar to the Taoist idea of the Tao. And in that way, it's somewhat different from the traditional Christian concept of God's omnipresence, because even though Christians say God is everywhere, God is completely separated from the created order of the world, whereas in Taoism, the Tao is part of that created order as well as separate from it. Let me read from the Tao Te Ching, just to give you a kind of a flavor for it. Remember, whenever you hear the word way, that's the word Tao. The ways that can be walked are not the eternal way. The names that can be named are not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of the myriad creatures. The named is the mother of the myriad creatures. Therefore, always be without desire, in order to observe its wondrous subtleties. Always have desire, so that you may observe its manifestations. Both of these derive from the same source. They have different names, but the same designation. Mystery of mysteries, the gate of all wonders. Well, that's something you have to contemplate and think about. It is purposely ambiguous, and yet in Taoism, the ambiguities are part of the reality, part of the true reality of life. So Taoism envisions an ideal world that is free from the constraints of civilized society, in contrast to Confucianism, for example, for which civilized society is the ideal. For the Taoists, civilization is inherently filled with mindless competition, with obsession for wealth and power, and therefore a civilized society is something to be avoided. Achieving harmonious unity with the Tao is achieved for Taoists not through rituals or deeds, but through wu wei, which is a word that means non-action. Non-action. Now, you say, well, why do you say non-action instead of inaction? Well, non-action and inaction are not the same thing. It's a slightly different concept. Let me read you another excerpt from the Tao Te Ching. This is Tao Te Ching number 38. I'm just going to read part of this, number 38. When the way is lost, afterward comes integrity. And remember, integrity is de, so Tao de, right? When integrity is lost, afterward comes humaneness. When humaneness is lost, afterward comes righteousness. When righteousness is lost, afterward comes etiquette. Now, etiquette is the attenuation of trustworthiness and a source of disorder. Foreknowledge is but the blossoming ornament of the way, the source of ignorance. So foreknowledge is the source of ignorance. For this reason, the great man resides in substance, not in attenuation. He resides in fruitful reality, not in blossomy ornament. Therefore, he rejects the one and adopts the other. So, I do want to read one other part from this. The person of superior integrity takes no action, nor has he a purpose for acting. The person of superior humaneness takes action, but has no purpose in acting. The person of superior righteousness takes action and has a purpose for acting. The person of superior etiquette takes action, but others do not respond to him, whereupon he rolls up his sleeves and coerces them. All right, so again, there's a lot of ambiguity in this, but the idea behind non-action, it's not sitting around and doing nothing, but it's acting in such a way that you don't try to coerce others to your point of view. It's a method of spiritual cultivation that brings beings into harmony with the universe. Non-action is also the best way to restore the world to its primordial harmony, which it lost with the advent of civilization. You can compare this praise of the time before civilization with the Romantic period, which was a movement that arose in the 18th and 19th centuries in opposition to the Enlightenment. Okay, after 2 centuries, or about 2 centuries after Lao Tzu, there was another Taoist sage, and his name was Zhuangzi. Master Zhuang. And he was born, his original name was Zhuangzhou. Traditionally, his dates are 368 to 286 BCE. He also wrote a book that has his same name. The Book of Zhuangzi is associated with him. It has 33 chapters. The first 7 of these chapters are associated with his writings, his words, and the rest of the chapters come from other sages up to the 3rd century CE. So the Book of Zhuangzi includes narratives, stories, as well as aphorisms, proverbial sayings. Some of these narratives include Lao Tzu and Confucius as characters in the narratives. Usually Confucius is caricatured as a strict moralist, but sometimes he's portrayed as a promoter of Taoist ideas, which he most certainly wasn't. You might compare the portrayal of Socrates in the Greek play The Clouds by Aristophanes. Socrates, in contrast to how we usually think of Socrates today as a wise teacher, in The Clouds, Aristophanes paints him as a sophist, kind of a ridiculous fool. Zhuangzi, the Book of Zhuangzi, deals with many of the same themes as the Daoism, such as the unity of the Tao, the value of serenity and withdrawal, and the celebration of nature. Zhuangzi was critical of political involvement. He said that it's hopelessly unproductive, incapable of making meaningful change. Change has to come from the inside. The only hope for change comes from changing human beings when selfish desires and ambitions are conquered. The sage, according to Zhuangzi, the sage realizes union with the Tao without getting entangled in narrow dogmatism such as that found in Confucianism. The wise person avoids intellectual and moral rigidity, taking instead a relativist standpoint. This is where we see the ambiguity that is part of both the Daoism and the Zhuangzi books. Once one realizes the true Tao, it is possible to be at peace with oneself, one's neighbors, and all others, even in times of great loss. I'm going to read you a short little story about Zhuangzi that's contained in the book, and it's called Zhuangzi loses his wife. When Zhuangzi's wife died, Huize came to his house to join in the rites of mourning. To his surprise, he found Zhuangzi sitting with an inverted bowl on his knees, drumming upon it and singing the song. After all, said Huize, she lived with you, brought up your children, grew old with you. That you should not mourn for her is bad enough, but to let your friends find you drumming and singing, that is going too far. You misjudge me, said Zhuangzi. When she died, I was in despair, as any man might well be. But soon, pondering on what had happened, I told myself that in death, no strange new fate befalls us. In the beginning, we lack not life only, but form. Not form only, but spirit. We are blended in one great, featureless, indistinguishable mass. Then a time came when the mass evolved spirit, spirit evolved form evolved life, and now life, in its turn, has evolved death. For not nature only, but man's being has its seasons, its sequence of spring and autumn, summer and winter. If someone is tired and has gone to lie down, we do not pursue him with shouting and bawling. She whom I have lost has lain down to sleep for a while in the great inner room. To break in upon her rest with the noise of lamentation would but show that I knew nothing of nature's sovereign law. That is why I ceased to mourn. All right, so that's the work called Zhuangzi Loses His Wife. And you can see that this is a contrast with Confucianism. In Confucianism, he would have been expected to follow certain rituals to the letter in honor of his wife's departed spirit, in honor to appease the gods, to accept his wife's soul, perhaps, into the afterlife. But in Daoism, that's not the case at all. The text of Zhuangzi, the book, shows an increased awareness of and interest in exploration of the inner world, the world of the self. It has portrayals of contemplation and meditation, references to sitting and forgetting, preserving the one, fasting the mind, and that means emptying the mind of all thoughts and images. Here's another very short saying from Zhuangzi. It's called his butterfly dream. He says, once upon a time I dreamt I was a butterfly, fluttering hither and thither, to all intents and purposes a butterfly. I was conscious only of my happiness as a butterfly, unaware that I was myself. Soon I awaked, and there I was, veritably myself again. Now I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man. All right. In the early period, Daoism absorbed ideas from other traditions and the 100 schools of thought, including Confucianism, Moism, legalism, the school of yin and yang. As Confucianism similarly derived ideas, and I'm sure the other schools of thought did as well. The traditional idea of creation was adopted by Daoism. The idea is that there was originally a primeval force that was divided into two complementary elements, yang and yin. Yang was a pure light element that moved up to form heaven, and yin was a dense, heavy element that moved down to create earth. Humans, the human world is between the two, and therefore it's made up of parts of both yin and yang. All right, and so that's very much a part of Daoism. In the late Han period, remember the Han period was a time where Confucianism was the dominant religion within China. The late Han period was a time of political and social upheaval, and a series of Taoist sages arose who came to be called the Celestial Masters. They were leaders of, one might say, a messianic movement that transformed Taoism into a recognizable religious institution. Before that, it had been primarily philosophical, but now the Celestial Masters transformed it into more of a religion. They even set up a self-ruled theocratic state in southwestern China that was egalitarian. So it did away with the different levels of society that were part of traditional Chinese society and inherent in Confucianism. So it was egalitarian. It accepted women as full-fledged members of the community. Unlike Confucianism, Daoism welcomed sages who withdrew from society and lived lives of contemplation. That was something that was rejected by Confucianism, but embraced by Daoism. Lao Tzu himself, the founder of Daoism, figured as a deity in some later Taoist communities. In others, he wasn't a divine figure, he wasn't a god, but he was the paradigmatic immortal being. He was someone who had attained immortality through learning and meditation, much in the same way as the Buddha does or did in Buddhism. Between the year 364 and 370, a man by the name of Yang Shi claimed to receive a series of divine revelations revealing a new class of supernatural beings who were above the immortals of earlier Taoist thought. In earlier Taoist thought, the immortals were, I guess we just call them the gods. And this class of beings that was above the gods were called the Jinren. And these were the, I guess you might think of them as perfected beings, even above the level of the gods. And according to Yang Shi, he got these revelations that from these Jinren, or perfected beings, he said that these beings descended from a high heaven called Supreme Clarity, Shanqing, Supreme Clarity, and the revelations that he got focused on seeking and acquisition of immortality, right? So later followers of Supreme Clarity Taoism, that is, those who accepted the teachings of Yang Shi, they collected his texts and they treated them as scripture. As the movement grew, it became more institutionalized. It had distinct rituals and ecclesiastical hierarchy, which traditional Taoism lacked. It had monastic communities. And in fact, Supreme Clarity Taoism grew to become the largest and most influential form of Taoism from the 6th through the 10th centuries. Another influential form of Taoism that emerged shortly after Supreme Clarity Taoism was called Numinous Treasure Taoism, or Lingbao Taoism, Numinous Treasure. It was also based on a series of divine revelations to a different person. It was focused on community-oriented liturgical forms of worship rather than inner contemplation. So that was how it contrasted with Supreme Clarity Taoism. It was influenced by Confucianism and especially by Buddhism, and it produced a number of sacred texts reflecting divine revelations, many of which are similar or sometimes even virtually identical to Buddhist texts. In Numinous Treasure Taoism, adherents of Numinous Treasure Taoism also believe in various levels of heaven and hell. Think about the circle in Buddhism of heaven and hell that has the different levels of heaven and hell. That's something similar to that is in Numinous Treasure Taoism. So, in the early medieval period, that is, say around the year 1000 or so, maybe a little before, Taoist texts were collected into 3 caverns, as they were called, and you can compare this to the 3 baskets of the Buddhist canon. The 3 caverns of Taoist texts were the cavern of perfection. These are the cavern of the Supreme Clarity Taoists. The cavern of mystery. This is the scriptures of the Lingbao, or the Numinous Treasure Taoists. And the cavern of divinity, the 3 sovereigns scriptures. This would be the other Taoist scriptures. Other texts were added over the centuries so that eventually the collection of Taoist sacred texts that were considered sacred or scripture by at least some group of Taoists numbered more than 1,500 separate titles. Daoism reached its peak of influence in China during the Tang Dynasty, that's 618 to 907. But even after it receded in influence among China's rulers, it continued to be influential, and it continues to be part of the Chinese traditional religion as it is observed today in China.